My name is Amanda, and 6 months ago at our family Christmas dinner, my mother-in-law Margaret stood up in front of 23 relatives and announced that I was barren, that I couldn't give her son children, and that maybe it was time for him to consider his options. What she didn't know was that in my purse, I was carrying adoption papers that would change everything about our family and prove that motherhood comes in many different forms. But to understand the magnitude of that moment, I need to take you back 4 years, to when I first married into the Richardson family and discovered that my worth as a woman would be measured entirely by my ability to produce grandchildren. I met Daniel Richardson when I was 28, working as a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital in Denver. He was a software engineer who'd brought his nephew to the emergency room after a playground accident, and something about the way he stayed calm while comforting a scared 6-year-old made me notice him immediately. "Is he going to be okay?" Daniel asked me as I cleaned the little boy's scraped knee. "He's going to be perfectly fine," I assured him, watching how gently he held his nephew's hand. "These things look scarier than they are." "Thank you," he said, and the genuine relief in his voice made me smile. I was babysitting for my sister, and I was terrified I'd have to explain to her how I let her son get hurt on my watch. "Accidents happen," I said. "The fact that you brought him in right away and stayed calm shows you're exactly the kind of person a scared kid needs." That conversation led to coffee the next week, dinner the week after that, and gradually, the most natural relationship I'd ever experienced. Daniel was kind, thoughtful, and shared my love for children and my belief that family was the most important thing in life. When he proposed 18 months later during a camping trip in the Rocky Mountains, I said yes without hesitation. I'd found my person, my partner, the father of the children I'd always dreamed of having. The wedding was beautiful, held at a historic mansion in Boulder, with all our friends and family celebrating our commitment to building a life together. Margaret, Daniel's mother, seemed genuinely happy about our marriage, welcoming me into the family with warm hugs and promises that she'd always wanted a daughter. "You're perfect for Daniel," she told me during the reception, holding my hands as we watched him dance with his teenage niece. "I can see how much you love children, and I know you're going to make beautiful babies together." Even then, the focus was on the babies we would make, but I didn't mind. I wanted children desperately, had always seen myself as a mother, and couldn't wait to start a family with Daniel. We waited a year after the wedding before we started trying to conceive, wanting to enjoy being newlyweds and get our finances stable before adding children to our lives. I went off birth control in the summer of 2019, and we both assumed it would happen quickly. Month after month, we waited for the positive pregnancy test that never came. At first, it wasn't concerning. Everyone knows it can take time, that stress can affect fertility, that some couples need several months or even a year to conceive. We tried to stay relaxed, to enjoy the process, to trust that it would happen when it was meant to happen. But as the months turned into a year, and the year stretched toward 18 months, the casual questions from Margaret became more pointed and frequent. "Any news yet?" she'd ask every time we visited, her eyes immediately going to my stomach, as if she could detect a pregnancy before I could. "We're still trying," I'd say, maintaining my privacy while trying to be polite. "You know, Amanda, you're not getting any younger," she'd continue, apparently unaware of how hurtful her comments were. "Daniel's 32 now, and he's always wanted to be a young father." These conversations always made me feel like I was failing at the most important job I'd ever had, even though we hadn't even been trying for very long by medical standards. When we'd been trying for over a year, Daniel and I decided to see a fertility specialist. The tests were extensive and emotionally draining, but we wanted to know if there were any obvious issues that could be addressed. The results were devastatingly unclear. "There's no obvious reason why you shouldn't be able to conceive," Dr. Martinez explained during our follow-up appointment. Amanda's hormone levels are normal, her ovaries are healthy, her tubes are clear. Daniel's sperm count and motility are excellent. Sometimes these things just take time. So what do we do? I asked. We can try some intervention methods, she said. Fertility drugs to stimulate ovulation, intrauterine insemination, eventually IVF if other methods don't work. But I'd also encourage you to consider that there are many paths to parenthood. The phrase, many paths to parenthood, would become increasingly important in the months that followed. We tried fertility drugs for 6 months. The hormones made me emotional and physically uncomfortable, and the constant monitoring of my cycle turned what should have been an intimate part of our marriage into a clinical process focused entirely on timing and outcomes. Margaret's comments during this period became increasingly insensitive and invasive. Maybe you're trying too hard, she'd suggest when we'd visit for family dinners. My friend's daughter got pregnant as soon as she stopped thinking about it. Maybe you should try acupuncture, she'd say another time. Or that fertility diet I read about online. Daniel's cousin had success with IVF, she'd mention casually. Of course, that's very expensive and doesn't always work. Every suggestion felt like an accusation that I wasn't doing enough, trying hard enough, wanting it badly enough. Every comment reinforced the message that my primary value as Daniel's wife was my ability to produce grandchildren for Margaret. The worst part was watching how these conversations affected Daniel. He tried to redirect his mother's focus, but he never directly told her to stop commenting on our fertility struggles. I began to feel like I was fighting this battle alone. After the fertility drugs failed to produce a pregnancy, we moved on to IOIWA. 3 attempts, each one involving careful timing, hormone injections, and hope that was gradually replaced by disappointment. The success rates for HOI aren't as high as we'd like, Dr. Martinez explained after our 3rd failed attempt. We could try a few more cycles, or we could consider moving to IVF. IVF, in vitro fertilization. The treatment that represented both the highest chance of success and the most invasive, expensive, emotionally demanding process we could undertake. What are our odds? Daniel asked. Given Amanda's age and the fact that we haven't identified any specific fertility issues, I'd estimate about a 40% chance of success per cycle. 40%. Better than a coin flip, but not by much. And each cycle would cost $15,000 and involve weeks of hormone injections, daily monitoring, and procedures that would turn my body into a science experiment. We decided to try 1 cycle of IVF. The process was everything I'd feared and more. Daily injections that left my stomach bruised and my emotions in chaos. Multiple doctor's appointments each week to monitor my response to the medications. An egg retrieval procedure that was uncomfortable and anxiety-provoking. We got 12 eggs, 8 of which fertilized successfully. 5 made it to the blastocyst stage suitable for transfer. We implanted 2 embryos and waited the longest 2 weeks of my life. The pregnancy test was negative. "I'm so sorry," Dr. Martinez said when she called with the results. "I know how difficult this is." I hung up the phone and cried for 3 hours straight, mourning not just the failed cycle, but the growing realization that my body might never be able to do what I'd always assumed it would do naturally. That night, Daniel held me while I sobbed and told me that he loved me regardless of whether we ever had biological children. "You are enough," he whispered into my hair. "You are more than enough, exactly as you are." But Margaret's reaction to our failed IVF was very different. "Maybe it's time to face reality," she said during Sunday dinner the week after we'd shared our disappointing news. "Maybe this is a sign that you should consider other options." "What kind of other options?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying a warning that his mother completely ignored. "Well, There are women who can carry babies for other people, she said delicately. Surrogacy, I think it's called. Or perhaps it's time to accept that some people aren't meant to be parents. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the blood draining from my face as I processed what Margaret had just suggested. Mom, Daniel said sharply, that's completely inappropriate. I'm just being practical, Daniel. Amanda's already 31, and you've been trying for over 2 years. Maybe it's time to consider that this isn't going to happen naturally. We have 3 frozen embryos left, I said quietly. We can try again. How many times are you willing to put yourself through this? Margaret asked, her tone suggesting that I was being selfish by continuing to try. How much money are you willing to spend chasing something that might never happen? That conversation marked a turning point in my relationship with Margaret and in my own thinking about parenthood. I began researching adoption, not because I was giving up on the possibility of biological children, but because I was starting to understand what Dr. Martinez had meant about there being many paths to parenthood. The more I learned about adoption, the more excited I became about the possibility. There were children who needed families, families who needed children, and love that could bridge any gap between biological and chosen relationships. I started attending adoption information sessions, learning about different types of adoption, different agencies, different processes for creating families through choice rather than genetics. What would you think about adopting? I asked Daniel one evening as we walked through our neighborhood, past houses full of families we hoped to someday join. I think, he said carefully, that I want to be a father more than I want to be a biological father. If that makes sense. It makes perfect sense, I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Have you been thinking about this for a while? He asked. I've been thinking about it since our IVF failed, I admitted. Not as a backup plan, but as a different path to the same destination. We spent the next few months learning about adoption while also preparing for our second IVF cycle. We weren't giving up on biological parenthood, but we were opening our hearts to alternative possibilities. The second IVF cycle failed as well. This time, instead of feeling devastated, I felt redirected. The grief was still there, but it was accompanied by a growing excitement about adoption that surprised me with its intensity. I want to move forward with adoption, I told Daniel after we'd processed the second negative pregnancy test. I want to start the application process. Are you sure? He asked. We still have 1 frozen embryo left. I'm sure, I said. I think this is the path we're supposed to be on. The adoption process was extensive and invasive in different ways than fertility treatments had been. Instead of monitoring my ovulation and hormone levels, social workers were evaluating our marriage, our finances, our emotional readiness for parenthood. Home studies, background checks, reference letters, financial statements, psychological evaluations. Every aspect of our lives was examined and documented to determine our suitability as adoptive parents. But unlike the fertility treatments, which had always felt like medical procedures I was enduring, the adoption process felt like preparation for something beautiful that was definitely going to happen. We're not trying to get pregnant, I explained to Margaret when she asked about our latest doctor's appointments. We're trying to adopt. Her reaction was immediate and negative. Adoption? She said, like I'd announced we were joining a cult. Daniel, surely you want to try for biological children a little longer? We've been trying for almost 3 years, Mom. We've done 2 rounds of IVF. We're ready to explore other options. But adopted children, they're not really yours, are they? They don't carry your genes, your family history, your traits. I felt like I'd been slapped across the face. Any child we adopt will absolutely be ours, Daniel said firmly. They'll be our family in every way that matters. I just think you're giving up too quickly, Margaret continued. There are other medical options, other specialists you could see. My friend's daughter went to a clinic in California that specializes in difficult cases. We're not giving up, I said, finding my voice despite the hurt I was feeling. We're choosing a different path to the same goal. It's not the same goal, though, is it? Margaret said with a coldness that took my breath away. The goal of having your own children versus taking someone else's children. Mom, stop, Daniel said. But his intervention felt too little, too late. I'm just saying that there's a difference between biological children and adopted children, and pretending there isn't won't change that reality. That conversation happened in March of last year. By June, we completed our home study and been approved for adoption. By August, we'd been matched with a pregnant woman who was planning to place her baby for adoption. Sarah was 19, a college student who'd gotten pregnant with a boyfriend who'd immediately disappeared when she told him about the pregnancy. She was smart, funny, responsible, and absolutely certain that adoption was the right choice for her and her baby. I want my son to have opportunities I can't give him right now, she told us during our first meeting. I want him to have two parents who are ready to be parents, who can provide stability and security while I finish school and build my career. Meeting Sarah and learning about her courage in making such a difficult decision was humbling and inspiring. This young woman was giving us the greatest gift imaginable, and she was doing it out of love for her unborn child. We attended doctor's appointments with Sarah, helped her with expenses, and gradually built a relationship that felt more like family than a business transaction. Are you nervous about people knowing he's adopted? Sarah asked me during one of our coffee dates when she was 8 months pregnant. No, I said, and I realized I meant it completely. I'm nervous about being a good mom, but not about how he comes to us. Good, she said, rubbing her growing belly. Because the way I see it, he's getting the best of both worlds. A biological mother who loves him enough to make sure he has the best possible life, and an adoptive mother who's chosen to love him before she's even met him. Margaret's reaction to our adoption plans was consistently negative throughout Sarah's pregnancy. Are you sure you want to get attached to this baby? She'd ask whenever we'd update the family on our progress. What if the birth mother changes her mind? What if there are medical issues you don't know about? She'd wonder aloud during family dinners. What if the biological father comes back and wants custody? She'd suggest, creating anxieties that hadn't occurred to us. Every comment was designed to undermine our confidence in our decision and to remind us that adoption was somehow a lesser form of family building than biological reproduction. But her most hurtful comments were about my role as an adoptive mother. It's not really the same as being a real mother, though, is it? She said during one particularly difficult conversation. I mean, you won't have the bond that comes from carrying the baby, from giving birth, from that biological connection. Love creates bonds, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Not just biology. I'm sure you'll love the baby, Margaret said in a tone that suggested she was being generous in acknowledging this possibility. But it won't be the same as loving your own child. These conversations were destroying my excitement about becoming a mother and making me doubt my ability to love an adopted child the way he deserved to be loved. Daniel's response to his mother's comments was inconsistent. Sometimes he'd defend our decision, but more often he'd try to change the subject or make excuses for her behavior. She's just having trouble adjusting to the idea, he'd say after particularly hurtful conversations. She'll come around once the baby arrives. When? I'd ask. When will she come around? Because her comments are making me feel like I'm not going to be a real mother to this baby. You know that's not true, Daniel would say, but his failure to shut down his mother's hurtful comments was becoming a serious problem in our marriage. Logan was born on December 15, 2021, at 3:47 in the morning. Daniel and I were in the delivery room when Sarah brought our son into the world, and the moment I saw him, every doubt Margaret had planted in my mind disappeared completely. He was perfect. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of absolute perfection, with Sarah's dark hair and eyes that seemed to look directly at me, even though I knew newborns couldn't really focus yet. "Hi, baby," I whispered as the nurse placed him in my arms for the first time. "I'm your mama. I've been waiting for you your whole life." The love I felt for Logan was instant, overwhelming, and completely natural. There was no difference between what I felt for him and what I imagined I would have felt for a biological child. He was mine in every way that mattered. Sarah's recovery was smooth, and she spent 3 days in the hospital bonding with Logan while also preparing to say goodbye. It was beautiful and heartbreaking to watch her love him enough to give him the life she'd chosen for him. "Take good care of him," she said as she signed the final adoption papers. "Tell him that his first mom loved him so much she wanted him to have everything." "I will," I promised, meaning it with every fiber of my being. We brought Logan home just before Christmas, and our house was transformed instantly from a place where we were waiting to become parents to a place where we actually were parents. The first few weeks were exhausting and wonderful and everything I'd imagined parenthood would be. Logan was a good baby, sleeping for reasonable stretches and seeming to recognize our voices from all the time we'd spent talking to him before he was born. But Margaret's reaction to Logan's arrival was disappointing in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. She visited when he was a week old, holding him carefully but distantly, like he was a fragile object rather than her grandson. "He's very sweet," she said after spending about 10 minutes with him. "Sarah seems like a nice girl. I hope she doesn't change her mind." "The adoption is final, Margaret," Daniel said. "Logan is legally our son." "I know that," she said, still not looking at the baby with the adoration I'd expected from a new grandmother. "I just mean that this whole situation is more complicated than if he were really yours." That phrase, "really yours," became Margaret's go-to way of reminding us that Logan was somehow less than a biological grandchild would have been. Over the next few months, the differences in how Margaret treated Logan versus her biological grandchildren became increasingly obvious and hurtful. When we'd visit Daniel's sister Jessica, who had 2 young daughters, Margaret would light up around the girls in ways she never did with Logan. "Grandma's girls," she'd exclaim when she saw them, scooping them up in enthusiastic hugs and showering them with attention. With Logan, she was polite but distant, holding him when asked but never seeking him out, praising his development in generic terms but never expressing the kind of grandmother pride she showed for the girls. "He's growing well," she'd say when people would ask about Logan. "Amanda and Daniel are very devoted to him." The subtle message was always that Logan was our project, our choice, our responsibility, but not really her family. The breaking point came at Christmas dinner last year. We were hosting the entire Richardson family for the first time since Logan's adoption. Jessica and her family, Daniel's brother Mark and his wife, Margaret, and Daniel's father Robert were all gathered around our dining room table for what should have been a celebration of our first Christmas as a family of 3. Logan was 6 months old by then, sitting in his high chair and charming everyone with his babbling and smiles. He was hitting all his developmental milestones, was healthy and happy, and was clearly bonding beautifully with Daniel and me. But Margaret spent the entire meal making comments that highlighted Logan's adopted status and my role as his adoptive rather than biological mother. "It's so nice that you've taken to motherhood so naturally, Amanda," she said while we were serving dessert. "I'm sure it's different than it would have been with your own baby, but you seem to be adjusting well." "Logan is my own baby," I said firmly. "Well, you know what I mean," Margaret continued. It's wonderful that you can love him even though you didn't carry him. There's no even though about it, Daniel said, his voice carrying a warning. Logan is our son, period. Of course he is, Margaret said in a tone that suggested she was humoring us. I just think it's important to be realistic about these things. The conversation continued in this vein throughout the meal, with Margaret making increasingly hurtful comments about adoption, biological bonds, and the differences between real families and chosen families. The final straw came when Logan started fussing in his high chair and reached his arms toward me, clearly wanting to be picked up. As I lifted him from his chair and he immediately settled against my shoulder, Margaret made the comment that would change everything. You know, Amanda, she said loudly enough for the entire table to hear, I've been thinking about your situation, and I really think it's time to be honest about some things. What things? I asked, feeling Logan's warm weight against my chest and drawing strength from his presence. Well, you've been pretending that this adoption thing is working out perfectly, but we all know there are challenges you're not talking about. What challenges? Daniel asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The fact that Amanda is barren, Margaret announced to the entire table. The fact that she can't give you biological children, and now you're both pretending that this adopted baby is the same thing as having your own family. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel every eye at the table turning toward me, could sense the shock and discomfort of the other family members as they processed what Margaret had just said. Mom, Jessica said quietly, that's completely inappropriate. I'm just being honest, Margaret continued, apparently oblivious to the devastation she was causing. Amanda is barren. She can't have children. And instead of accepting that reality and dealing with it honestly, you've both decided to play house with someone else's baby. Logan was still in my arms, and I found myself holding him tighter as Margaret continued her attack. I think it's time for Daniel to consider whether this is really the life he wants. Whether he wants to spend his life with a woman who can't give him real children, who can only offer him someone else's leftovers. The word leftovers was like a physical blow. She was calling my beautiful, perfect son leftovers. That's when Logan, my 6-month-old son who didn't understand the words being said, but who could clearly sense the tension in the room, did something that changed everything. He pulled back from my shoulder, looked directly at Margaret with his clear brown eyes, and said his first word. Mama. Not ma or any of the random sounds that babies make. A clear, unmistakable mama, directed at me while he patted my face with his tiny hand. The table erupted in gasps and excited exclamations from everyone except Margaret, who sat frozen in her chair, staring at Logan like he'd just performed a miracle. Did he just say mama? Jessica asked, her voice full of excitement. That was definitely mama, Mark confirmed. His first word. Say it again, buddy, Daniel encouraged, moving closer to us. Say mama. Logan looked around at all the attention he was getting, smiled his biggest smile, and repeated it clearly. Mama. This time he was looking directly at me, and there was no question about who he was talking to or what he meant. Margaret's face had gone completely white. She was staring at Logan and me like she was seeing something that challenged everything she believed about biology, motherhood, and family bonds. He knows who his mother is, Robert said quietly, speaking for the first time since Margaret had started her attack. He knows who his mama is. The rest of the evening was a blur of excitement about Logan's first word, with everyone wanting to hear him say it again, taking videos to commemorate the moment and celebrating this milestone in his development. But Margaret remained silent and shaken, apparently unable to reconcile what she just witnessed with her beliefs about adoption and biological bonds. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Daniel and I put Logan to bed and finally had a chance to process what had happened. "I'm so sorry about what my mother said," Daniel told me as we stood in Logan's nursery, watching our son sleep peacefully in his crib. "She called me Barren in front of your entire family," I said, still feeling the sting of that public humiliation. "She was completely out of line. There's no excuse for what she said. And she called Logan leftovers." "She was wrong about everything," Daniel said firmly. "You are Logan's mother in every way that matters. What happened tonight proved that." "His first word," I said, still marveling at the timing. Of all the moments for him to say mama for the first time. "Like he knew you needed to hear it," Daniel said, putting his arm around me as we watched Logan sleep. The next few days brought a series of conversations with various family members about Margaret's behavior at Christmas dinner. Jessica called to apologize for her mother's comments and to express how appalled she was by what had happened. "What she said was cruel and completely wrong," Jessica told me. "Logan is absolutely your son, and anyone with eyes can see how much he loves you." Mark and his wife reached out with similar messages of support, making it clear that Margaret's views didn't represent the feelings of the rest of the family. But it was Robert's call that surprised me the most. "Amanda," Daniel's father said when he called 3 days after Christmas, "I need to apologize for my wife's behavior." "Thank you, Robert. That means a lot. I also need to tell you something that I probably should have said a long time ago. Margaret has never been comfortable with adoption because of something that happened in her own family." "What do you mean?" "Margaret's youngest sister was adopted," Robert explained. "Their parents never handled it well, always treated Sarah differently, always made her feel like she didn't really belong. Margaret grew up believing that adopted children could never really be full family members." "That's horrible," I said, beginning to understand the source of Margaret's prejudices. "It is horrible, and it's wrong, but it explains why she's been so resistant to accepting Logan as her grandson. She's operating from a place of fear and old pain, not from anything logical or fair." "Does that excuse what she said at dinner?" "Absolutely not," Robert said firmly. "What she said was unforgivable. But I wanted you to understand that it comes from her own damage, not from anything real about you or Logan." "What happens now?" "Now Margaret needs to decide whether she wants to be part of Logan's life or not. Because if she can't accept him as her full and complete grandson, then she doesn't deserve to be part of his family." Robert's support meant more to me than I could express. Having Daniel's father validate our family and our choices helped counteract some of the damage Margaret's words had caused. But the real healing came from Logan himself. Over the next few weeks, as he continued to develop and grow, Logan's bond with me became even more obvious and undeniable. He reached for me when he was upset, laughed at my silly songs, settled immediately when I held him. Mama became his favorite word, and he used it constantly throughout the day. When he woke up in the morning, when he wanted attention, when he was happy or sad or just feeling chatty. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that Logan knew exactly who his mother was, and it wasn't biology that had taught him. It was love, consistency, care, and the countless hours I'd spent feeding him, bathing him, rocking him to sleep, and responding to his needs. 3 months after the Christmas dinner incident, Margaret called and asked if she could visit. "I want to try to make things right," she said during our awkward phone conversation. "I want to get to know Logan properly." I was hesitant, still hurt by her Christmas comments and protective of Logan's emotional well-being. But Daniel encouraged me to give her a chance, and I agreed to a supervised visit. Margaret arrived with a bag full of toys and books, clearly having made an effort to come prepared for grandmother duties. But it was her interaction with Logan that showed me she was genuinely trying to change. When Logan saw her, He smiled politely but reached for me, clearly recognizing that this woman wasn't someone he knew well. Instead of taking offense or making comments about biological bonds, Margaret respected his boundaries and focused on earning his trust gradually. "Hi, Logan," she said softly, sitting on the floor near his play area. "I'm your Grandma Margaret. I brought you some books." She spent the next hour reading to him, playing with his toys, and talking to him in the gentle, loving tone that I'd seen her use with her biological grandchildren. And Logan, being the sweet, open child he is, gradually warmed up to her attention. By the end of the visit, he was showing her his favorite toys and even said hi when she encouraged him to practice his words. "He's wonderful," Margaret said as she was leaving. "He's smart and sweet and clearly so loved." "He is loved," I said firmly. "Amanda," she said, stopping at the door and looking directly at me for the first time since Christmas. "I owe you an enormous apology." "Yes, you do. What I said at Christmas was cruel and wrong and based on my own prejudices that have nothing to do with your family. Logan is your son, you are his mother, and anyone who watches you together can see that." "Thank you for saying that. I'd like to try to be a better grandmother to him if you'll let me. I'd like to be part of his life the way I am with Jessica's girls." "That's up to you, Margaret, but it means treating him exactly the same way you treat your other grandchildren. No comments about adoption, no suggestions that he's somehow less than a biological child, no reminders that he's different." "I understand," she said, "and I'll do better." Over the next few months, Margaret has made genuine efforts to build a relationship with Logan and to treat him as her full and complete grandson. She babysits him when Daniel and I need date nights, includes him in all family activities, and brags about his accomplishments to her friends with the same pride she shows for her other grandchildren. It's not perfect, and I don't think our relationship will ever be the same as it was before Christmas dinner. But for Logan's sake, I'm grateful that Margaret has chosen to change rather than miss out on knowing her grandson. The most beautiful part of this whole experience has been watching Logan continue to develop and thrive as part of our family. At 15 months old now, he's walking, talking, and showing a personality that's uniquely his own. He's funny and curious and affectionate, with a smile that lights up every room he enters. He calls Daniel Dada and me Mama, with complete confidence in who we are and what we mean to him. There's never been a moment of confusion about his place in our family or our place in his life. When people ask about his adoption, he's too young to understand the complex dynamics involved. All he knows is that he's loved unconditionally by the people who feed him, comfort him, and show up for him every single day. Sarah visits every few months, and Logan lights up when he sees her, clearly recognizing someone who's important in his life. But he doesn't confuse her role with mine. She's someone special who loves him, but I'm his mama. The relationships we've built through Logan's adoption have expanded our family in beautiful ways. Sarah has become like a younger sister to me, someone I care about and stay in touch with regularly. Her parents have become like additional grandparents, people who love Logan and support our family. Logan doesn't have fewer family members because he's adopted. He has more. Dr. Martinez, our fertility specialist, recently asked how we were adjusting to parenthood through adoption. "It's everything I hoped it would be," I told her. "There's no difference between the love I feel for Logan and what I imagine I would have felt for a biological child." "Are you still interested in trying for biological children?" she asked. "Honestly, I can't imagine loving another child more than I love Logan. If we decide to expand our family, it will probably be through adoption again." "That's wonderful," she said. "You found your path to parenthood." And I have. The path was different than I'd expected, more complex and challenging in some ways, but ultimately more beautiful than I could have imagined. Logan's first word wasn't just a developmental milestone, it was a declaration, a clear, unmistakable statement about who he belongs to and who belongs to him. When Margaret stood up at Christmas dinner and called me Barren in front of our entire family, she thought she was exposing a shameful truth about my inadequacy as a woman. What she actually did was create the perfect moment for Logan to prove that motherhood isn't about biology. It's about love, commitment, and the daily choice to show up for a child who needs you. The word barren that Margaret used to attack me has become meaningless in the face of Logan's love. I may not have been able to carry him in my womb, but I've carried him in my heart from the moment I first learned about him. I may not have given birth to him, but I've given him everything else: midnight feedings and diaper changes, first smiles and first steps, comfort when he's scared, and celebration when he succeeds. The bond between us wasn't created by shared DNA. It was created by shared experiences, daily care, and the kind of love that chooses to keep showing up regardless of biology. Margaret's attack was based on the assumption that adoptive families are somehow less than biological families, that adopted children are somehow less loved than biological children, that adoptive mothers are somehow less committed than biological mothers. Logan's first word proved all of those assumptions wrong. He didn't call out for his biological mother when he needed comfort. He called for me. He didn't recognize Margaret's genetic connection to his father as making her special. He responded to my love, my care, my presence in his daily life. The truth that Margaret couldn't accept is that families are built through choice and commitment, not just genetics. The love between Logan and me is no less real, no less powerful, no less meaningful than it would have been if I'd carried him for 9 months. In fact, in some ways, it's more meaningful because it was chosen deliberately rather than happening accidentally. Sarah chose us to be Logan's parents because she saw something in us that convinced her we would love him well. Logan chooses me as his mama every day through his smiles, his reaching arms, his comfort-seeking behavior when he's upset. Daniel chooses our family every day by prioritizing our needs over his mother's prejudices, by defending our choices, by showing up as the father Logan deserves. Even Margaret, eventually, chose to change her attitude and accept Logan as her grandson rather than miss out on knowing him. Every day, we all make the choice to be a family. That choice is more powerful than any genetic connection could ever be. The fertility struggles that brought us to adoption were devastating at the time, but they led us to Logan, and I can't imagine our family without him. The path was more difficult than I'd expected, but the destination is more beautiful than I ever dreamed. When people ask me about our fertility journey, I tell them that it taught me the difference between wanting to be pregnant and wanting to be a mother. I'd always thought they were the same thing, but they're not. I wanted to be pregnant because I thought that was the only way to become a mother. When pregnancy didn't happen for us, I discovered that there are many ways to become a mother, and all of them lead to the same beautiful destination: unconditional love for a child who calls you mama. The scars from our fertility struggles have healed, but they've been replaced by something better: gratitude for the journey that led us to Logan and confidence in the family we've built together. Margaret's Christmas dinner attack was meant to shame me for my infertility and minimize my role as Logan's mother. Instead, it became the moment when Logan first declared his love for me in a way that no one could deny or diminish. Her cruel words were immediately answered by his sweet voice calling me exactly what I am, his mama. The timing was so perfect that it felt orchestrated by something larger than coincidence. Like Logan somehow knew that I needed to hear those words at that exact moment, that his family needed proof of our bond that even Margaret couldn't dismiss. 6 months later, I carry that moment with me as evidence of something I now know without question: love makes families, not biology. Logan may not have my eyes or Daniel's nose, But he has our values, our humor, our love for music and books and long walks in the park. He has our commitment to kindness, our belief in the importance of family, our excitement about building a life together. He's ours in every way that matters, and we're his in every way that counts. The word barren that Margaret used to describe me is medically accurate but emotionally meaningless. My womb may be empty, but my arms are full. My eggs may not have developed into a baby, but my heart has developed into a mother's heart. I may not have given Logan life, but I'm giving him a lifetime of love, support, guidance, and security. I may not have been his first mother, but I'm his forever mother. And when he said "Mama" for the first time while Margaret was attacking my worth as a woman and a mother, he settled the question of our bond forever. He knows who his mama is. He's known from the beginning. The rest is just noise. Today, as I write this story, Logan is napping in his crib upstairs, probably dreaming baby dreams about blocks and books and all the simple pleasures that make up his world. In a few hours, he'll wake up calling Mama like he does every day, and I'll go to him like I do every day, and we'll continue building the beautiful life we've created together. Margaret was wrong about everything that mattered. I'm not barren. I'm blessed. Logan isn't leftovers. He's a gift. Our family isn't less than. It's everything. And sometimes, the most painful accusations lead to the most beautiful revelations about who we really are and what we're really capable of. I am Logan's mama. He is my son. We are a family. That's all the truth that matters. If you've ever been told you're not enough, if anyone has ever suggested that your family doesn't count because it wasn't built the traditional way, if you've ever been attacked for circumstances beyond your control, remember this: love is what makes families real, and love is always enough. Sometimes the cruelest words lead to the sweetest moments of validation. Sometimes the people who try to diminish you end up being the witnesses to your greatest triumphs. And sometimes, a 6-month-old baby saying "Mama" for the first time is the most powerful response to hatred you could ever ask for. Margaret thought she was exposing my failure as a woman. Instead, she created the perfect opportunity for Logan to celebrate my success as his mother. The word barren will never hurt me again, because every time Logan calls me Mama, he proves that my capacity for love is infinite. That's the truth that set us all free.